So let me just jump into this. I want to talk mainly about the election also. I want to add to what John said, but I want to start with this. After Trump was elected in 2016, I was having gastrointestinal issues. This is no joke. I went to the doctor and I was talking about it, and I said to the doctor, half jokingly, I thought that it might have to do with Trump. And he looked at me very seriously and he said, I can't tell you how many patients have said exactly the same thing to me. For the last 4 years, we've been living through very intense anxiety, those of us that are progressive. But it's anxiety on top of anxiety. There's an anxiety that we've been experiencing because of a peculiar kind of tectonic clash between the global economic crisis and the global environmental crisis. And this has created a situation where on a planetary scale, there's this unease about what the future will bring. In 2020, this was further enhanced by a situation that has only been paralleled once in the last 100 years, and that was in 1919. When in 1919, there was plague, there was a depression, there were racial pogroms, and there was mass red baiting and repression. And in 2020, we had much the same thing. We had a plague in the form of the pandemic, an economic collapse that none of us have seen on this kind of scale in our lifetimes. We've had a play on race by the Trump administration and right-wing populists, as well as a counter to that in what came to be known as the Black Lives Matter movement. And there's been significant red baiting and repression and threats of repression. Now, the election, I would say in looking at the election, there's a few particular factors that we need to focus on. And in the interest of time, I'm going to probably only focus on two. One is the issue of race. The second is revanchism. The third is the rejection of reality by millions of people. The fourth is voter suppression. And the fifth is the plague, pandemic. And very quickly, I just want to say that with race, we've been dealing with this on the part of the Trump as an individual and the movement that he leads, which I think is misnamed Trumpist. It's not, it's a right-wing populist movement. And Trump is the rattler on the tail of the rattlesnake. He is not the snake itself. The snake has been going through the body politic, injecting poison in the body politic for a very, very long time. We just now happen to hear the rattle from the snake, and it's a very, very loud rattle. And so Trump has been playing on this for quite some time. And in 2020, there was a counterattack. And that was in the form of what came to be known as the Black Lives Matter movement, the reemergence after the George Floyd murder. And that had two results that were related to the election. One was an igniting of the Black electorate and the youth electorate. But it also ignited the right-wing electorate. And the part of what we probably can look at is why the so-called blue wave did not come together, in addition to the plague, is that there was a massive response by the right wing. And it was as if Trump was channeling Richard Nixon in 1968 and playing to the fears of millions of white people about disorder and civil unrest. The second thing is revanchism, a term we don't use very much in the United States. I use it a lot. It's most associated with Germany after World War I and World War II. It's a particular politics of revenge that is focused on seizing back what someone alleges was taken from them. So in the aftermath of World War I, For the Germans, of course, it was their colonies, some of their land, their naval fleet, etc. In the United States context, revanchism has many features, some of which are racial. The revanchists essentially argue that it doesn't pay to be white anymore. Gender-wise, the right-wing populist movement is in search of the 1950s and wishes to reassert the role of Donna Reed and June Cleaver as the iconic figures for women, and the complete suppression of all non-gender binary directions. Revanchism also plays itself out in the foreign policy realm, and this is one of the key things I want to point to, in that it is this argument that the United States needs to reassert its sole global role, and it's a particular kind of isolationism, which I would argue many progressive and left forces have misunderstood. The character of US isolationism is not autarky. It's not isolating the US from the rest of the world. This was a mistake in 2016 that even some leftists made. There was one who I remember reading, and I'll never forget, writing a commentary that argued that Donald Trump was a closet peace candidate in 2016 because he was an isolationist in opposition to Hillary Clinton. And I think that what many people fail to understand about US isolationism is that the term is a misnomer. That what really is at stake is the notion that the US should never be constrained by international agreements, that the US should be able to do whatever it wants, whenever it wants, to whomever it wants, and not face anyone's wrath. And that is quintessential right-wing populism, and it's also quintessential Donald Trump. And many people misread that when they would hear him say things like, we don't want to get in interminable wars. Well, okay, but it was okay to start wars as long as they weren't interminable, right? It was okay to try to undermine Venezuela as long as it wasn't going to be interminable. It would be okay to muck up Iran as long as it wasn't interminable. So I think that we've got to dig beneath the surface and understand the danger of this revanchism. The third thing about the election, the rejection of reality. Millions of people voted to join the Flat Earth Society. And they did so by, in fact, saying that that there is no COVID crisis, that there is no environmental crisis. Or they were saying that if there is, it doesn't really matter because what we see in Trump is more important. We're willing to deal with his fantasies because we get something else out of it. And this rejection of reality and appeasement of delusional thinking is something that we're going to have to be facing over the coming period. Now, I just want to add that many people act as if this is a new phenomenon. It's not. In right-wing populist movements, you look at this back into the 19th century, a long history of conspiracy theories, delusional conduct. You think about in the 1950s, the John Birch Society, and the whole fear of fluoridation of water as an alleged communist conspiracy, et cetera. You see these subterranean notions of lizard people basically taking over the planet. This is no joke, really. Right-wing propagating this idea of lizard people. And it's like it comes out of the X-Files. And in fact, the slogan of the Trump movement really should be from the X-Files. We want to believe. And so you have this. What's different is the impact of social media in terms of being able to bring these lunatic ideas together and give them a scale that they did not have in the 1950s. The two other areas I want to mention about the elections I don't have time to go into. One is about voter suppression. So in one sense, the Trump people are right. The election was rigged, but it was rigged in his favor by years and years of voter suppression on the part of the Republicans. And of course, the plague, none of us alive have, in the United States, have had an electoral season when there was a pandemic at the scale that we're dealing with. And I would argue, and I'd be interested in John's feeling on this, I would argue
You have
that,
1 minute left, Bill.
thank you, the pandemic undermined the ground game of the Democrats. It did not undermine the ground game of the Republicans because they didn't believe it was a pandemic. But for the Democrats, it did. And for several months, it was a virtual campaign. And now we see the limitations of virtual campaigns. One final point, Savina. Building on what John was raising, I believe that part of the problem with the blue wave notion was that Biden built a brilliant united front against Trump. Brilliant. The Democrats thought that that united front against Trump was going to work its way down ballot and that people would vote to reject the idiots who had supported the idiot in chief. And the problem is that that didn't work, that we needed something stronger down ballot programmatically that inspired people to vote against the idiots who had supported the idiot in chief. Much more I could say, including about foreign policy, but in the interest of time, I'm going to stop there. Thank you, Savina.
Thank you so much, Bill.